is Lewis Tinsley. I am on the board of APA DC. I have the pleasure of introducing a good friend of mine, Candace Chambers. But before that, we have a few APA points that we want to share with you all. So give me 1 second here. All right. Can you see my screen okay? All right. Yeah, so APA is a nonprofit trade organization built by photographers for photographers. We offer business tools and creative inspiration. It helps photographers run a smarter, more creative, and profitable business. Through our local chapters, APA offers a sense of community, inspiration, and networking to reinforce the local photographic market. APA helps to keep our profession strong, advocating on behalf of all members to keep the photo industry dynamic, fluent, influential, and robust. So we have a few events coming up. Saturday, May 3rd, we have our coffee break at the Portrait Gallery. Always a good time if you just want to catch up with some other photographers in the area, pick their brains about what's going on in the market. This is the one of the ones I would recommend. And then also the happy hour, another great opportunity to just pick people's brains. We will be having this at Sonny's Pizza on Georgia Avenue, Thursday, May 22nd. So mark your calendars. Also, big announcement. So pretty much right after this Zoom at 1 o'clock, APA Circle is going live. So it's essentially another networking community built for photographers. Meet people, make connections. We have our the event going live at 1 p.m. Eastern. So be aware of that. And then second, if you are trying to get more experience on set, if you're assisting, reach out to us and we can get your name on the assistant and crew list. I recommend people all the time and I forward this list to them all the time. So we are getting people working. So definitely reach out. And of course, if you are new to APA, we have tons of partnerships and member benefits and discounts with a number of national organizations and local places here too. I always forget what we have going on. There's a great little tab on the APA DC website that will list everything for you there. Be sure to check it out. And if you are once again new to APA, we have a $20 membership code DC1 for 20. Go ahead and scan that QR code if you need. But let me cancel this. But without further ado, I say let's get back into the presentation and I'll have Candace take it from here. So let me have you.
Hi, folks. Hope we're all doing well. I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share. All right. Can folks see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So yes, I am Candace Dane Chambers. I'm a portrait and PJ photographer based in Washington, D.C. I just want to start by thanking you all for joining me today. I know we're all busy, so spending 30 minutes with me is an honor. So I'll go ahead and jump right in. So essentially, I just kind of want to walk through the evolution of my photo practice. I got my first DSLR camera in 2014 as a graduation gift from undergrad from my mother. And she asked me, she said, "What are you interested for a grad gift?" I asked for a camera and she was kind of bewildered because I'd never really expressed any interest in photography. With the exception of one high school course in photography that was actually taught by an APA member, Johnny Shryock, who I have since worked with on jobs in the past 2 or 3 years, which has been a funny moment to see my very first photography teacher along with me in the field in Washington, D.C. So I took one course in high school. I got an A, thank you, Johnny, but I hadn't really expressed any interest in photography until I graduated from college. So we went down to Best Buy, we bought the camera. It was a Nikon. I couldn't even tell you the body, some kind of low grade Nikon with a kit lens. And at the time, I was working in the NGO space, and immediately following graduation, I had an opportunity to spend the summer in Salzburg, Austria, working for a nonprofit out there. So I naturally took my camera. Austria is an incredibly picturesque location. And so I took what was considered at the time like Tumblr fodder. It was 2014. Tumblr was still a thing. I'm sure many of us on the call remember the Tumblr days. So yeah, it was like very traditional kind of lifestyle travel photography, landscapes, some architecture. And my editing style at the time was heavy saturation and contrast. Um, am I seeing messages in the chat? Oh, you love Tumblr. Amen. Okay. Um, how do I minimize this? All right. So next, please. Okay, so my summer in Austria kind of comes to a close. I come back from Austria to the DC area briefly, and then I eventually moved to Los Angeles and start my first career, which was in fashion. I was a production coordinator for a while for a streetwear brand called Richardson, and then I was an assistant buyer for a shop in Hollywood. So I did that from 2015 to 2018. Um, I will say I never really felt aligned in the fashion industry. I was someone who cares about the craftsmanship of clothing at a certain level. I think of myself to be somewhat stylish. And so I thought maybe this would be a space that was a good fit for me. But at the end of the day, the major decisions, and this is not to be trite because obviously this is people's careers, but the major decision was like the blue paisley print or the pink paisley print. And sometimes I just could not muster up um, the required care, honestly, to be really deeply involved in those decisions. And I also felt like the fashion community in general just weren't really my people. So in 2018, I ended up leaving my job at the boutique in Hollywood. And it also aligned with my personal timeline in which I ended up having to come from LA back to DC to care for an ailing family member. So that was in 2018. My family member unfortunately passed away. And when that happened and I was able to go back to LA, I decided I really didn't want to move forward in fashion anymore because it really didn't seem like the right fit. So at the time, my partner was a photographer. And he and I would go to photo related events. We'd go to markets where people would be selling gear. And so one day I bought a little film camera, a Pentax K1000. And I started to play around with it and I enjoyed it. And my partner, of course, he knew more about photography and was my teacher to a certain extent. Um, but we actually weren't great as teacher and student. So I decided to actually go take some courses elsewhere to learn how to use my camera. Uh, there we go. So I decided to take a course at the Otis College of Art and Design. It was a one-off course. It was taught by a West Coast street photographer named Abe Pildes. And Abe Pildes is kind of a local street photography legend. He also has been a jazz musician photographer for many, many years. So he's traveled around the world and has some really beautiful jazz portrait photography. And also was for a time, I believe in the 70s or 80s, he was the photo director and lead photographer at Capitol Records, the record label. Um, so he was my first serious photography instructor, or I should say my second one. Sorry, Johnny, second after Johnny. But the first instructor I had in which I really got serious about photography. And so the way the class worked is we would just go to different areas in Los Angeles and shoot. So we would kind of go to the quintessential ones. Let me see if I can zoom a little bit. So we went to Venice Beach, which is obviously like teeming with life and characters. And I think I did some kind of cliche Venice photography. You know, we got surfer dude, we've got bikers here. Um, We've got some street performers, and then we've got my guy here who's giving me the Popeye pose. So I don't actually have a lot of digital files from this time because simultaneously, while I was taking this class, I was taking a darkroom class. So I would get all my film developed and get a contact sheet and immediately go print the work. So I don't have a lot of digital files, which is interesting because it's the only body of work where I have more physical prints of than actual digital files. So I have a few that I found that I can hold up to the camera. If you can see, I know I'm small on most of your screens, but um, here's a print of my Popeye the Sailor. Um, Here's that surfer print that I mentioned. And then here's a capture of the street performers. So Abe was a formative instructor for me because he gave me a lot of liberty. He said, shoot whatever you like. The only rule is try to expose it correctly, unless you're not doing that with intention. And it was there that I kind of trained my eye and started realizing like what I'm attracted to, and also started to build like the courage and comfort that's required to go up to a stranger on the street and snap a photo. Um, so that course was, I think, maybe 3 or 4 months. And as I mentioned, I had been living in Los Angeles in total for maybe, I guess, 3 years at the time. And obviously, LA is a really huge transplant city. So a lot of my community were also transplants. And I loved it. It was vibrant, and there was lots to do in those spaces. But in some ways, it can be difficult to tap into like true, authentic Angelino culture because there is so much other things going on around you because of, the entertainment industry and, any other industry that might draw folks to Los Angeles. So it wasn't until I was like 3 years in that I felt like I really connected with Black Angelino culture. And it was through a very good friend of mine. Her name is Jasmine Harvey, and I believe she's a third or fourth generation Angelino. And her grandfather was actually a very famous Black architect called Paul Williams. He built houses for Frank Sinatra and Lucille Ball. He was responsible for the redesign of the Beverly Hills Hotel that has created like that really iconic signage and that pink and green Art Deco color palette. So Jasmine and her family have kind of been embedded in Black Los Angeles for a long time. She is the one who's kind of brought me into more traditional spaces. So one of the spaces that she shared with me is a bar and nightclub called the Regency West. And the Regency West was opened in Leimert Park in 1973. So Leimert Park is a very famous Black business district in Los Angeles. And in the 70s and 80s, it was very successful, but in recent years has kind of dealt with a lot of divestment and kind of fallen into disrepair. But the Regency West is one institution that has held strong. So they have an infamous Taco Tuesday night. And every Tuesday, they have the tacos, and people come out dressed to the nines. And people come out who are local Angelinos who have been coming there for decades and decades. I mean, some of them since the 70s. I remember one of my first nights there, there's a DJ, and I remember the DJ calling out and saying, like, Jefferson class of 89, and the crowd going crazy. And it was in that moment that I understood that, like, oh, these are the people who are truly born and bred here and have been in community and fellowship with these specific people, since their teen years. And these are people in their 50s and 60s. So the ties run deep. So at this point, I was still shooting film. This is all Ilford 400 black and white film. And shooting here was really interesting and a lot of trial and error. Like when I started shooting here, I was shooting with no flash, which is ludicrous looking back. It's like, what? I don't know what I thought I was going to come away with. But obviously those roles didn't really develop. And then also there was a learning process in terms of like building rapport with the people who attend on a regular basis, because, who are you, this girl with the camera, and also building a rapport with the family that still runs the space. So, like I said, it was bought and founded by a man named Fred Calloway, who was the father of a Black actress named Vanessa Bell Calloway, who some of you might know. So Vanessa and her husband and her children still run the space. So I kind of had to get their blessing before I could really start to create. So even on those nights when my role didn't come out, I still was creating like investment in the community. So I was able to kind of complete this work that was shot over the course of, a year kind of on and off. So this is a few frames. You can see my guy here in his silk shirt and his 10-gallon hat. Um, the dance floor was always live, and that was something that was really cool too. Again, I'm in my early 20s. There's plenty of parties in Los Angeles and people are dancing, but there isn't a lot of like partner dance that's happening really. Um, there's something about I think like millennial generations and even younger, and maybe even like Gen X, like the art of like dancing with a partner has kind of been lost in a way. And in this space, it was very much alive and well. And it was like nice to see that kind of like intimacy and tradition really still take place. So this woman here, it was her birthday. And in some spaces, if it's your birthday, people pin money on you. So you can see she's got her dollar bills for her birthday celebration. And then this woman here on the edge, oops, let me see if I can get a better frame of her. So this woman here on the edge, she would come there every week. And I noticed her because she stood out, obviously. She was clearly intoxicated and she would hold her corner of the dance floor for hours and everyone would just let her be. She was never put out, to my knowledge. She was never bothered or disturbed. And it's very clear that she was obviously dealing with some real trauma and addiction issues. But I thought there was something so special and telling about the space that these folks there still offered this woman the dignity of being able to come and join on the dance floor and kind of get that physical release that they all were also experiencing, and for her to be able to do so in total safety. So I think this image speaks a lot to what type of space this is for the community. It is truly for everyone. This is a domino game. These were serious business. You can see everybody's kind of locked in. And there's lots of characters at play. There's the guy in the middle who's got his hat on and his jacket. There's the dude to his left who's clocking his hand, and he's also got like a little pimp cup in his hand. The guy in the foreground, he's got his hat and glasses on and a feather in his hat. And these were the kind of games that went on simultaneously as a dance floor party was going on. And it was really reminiscent of the kind of like house parties that my grandma would tell me about when there's a table on the side where people are playing tonk or bid whist or things like that. And on another side of the room, people are, just dancing and enjoying. So again, these are a few more images that just show the dance floor and kind of like the intimacy and like tenderness that was on display in these spaces. So the two on the ends are obviously couples, or they were couples for the night at least. And then in the middle is a shot of a line dance, actually, which is also obviously very traditional in terms of like Black culture. They were probably doing the slide or the shuffle. And I just love big man in the middle, kind of experiencing a little bit of jubilation as he hits his slide to the left. And so there was everything that was happening inside the establishment, but like also outside was a whole different show. People would pull up in their old schools and their like beautiful candy painted cars, and bikers would pull up in their bikes to kind of stunt from the outside. So this is just like a little detail shot of somebody's bike that's obviously been custom engraved, pimping. So that was my first foray into a documentary series, which I wasn't really conscious about at the time. I just thought it was a cool space and I wanted to keep coming back and capturing it because, again, it was something that felt special to me and like worthy of sharing. Um, so once that started, I kind of got a bit of a bug to continue to keep shooting, and I started traveling. So one of the first places I went was to St. John's, to the Virgin Islands. And at this point, I had continued shooting on film. So this was Carnival 2019. And the way Carnival works, most people think of Carnival and they think of the big parade and the women with the feathers and the beaded dresses. But Actually, Carnival is often a multi-day event. And let me jump in the chat just to see if y'all are talking to me. Oh, thank you, thank you. Oh, just compliments. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. Yeah, so this is the village, right? So the village is the night before the big parade, and it's a big party. There's like performers, people get on stage, people from the crowd can go up on stage. If you got a little something to show off, you can see in this bottom left corner, those are like crowd members that were brought up. And so these again, there's like intimacy on display, but like someone said in the comments, it's really about like color and adornment. And kind of the beginnings, or I guess really a continuation of kind of an exploration of the ways in which like folks in the diaspora adorn themselves in really ornate ways that kind of look similar from place to place, like you can kind of track the through lines. So this is a film collection from that night. And then this is the actual parade that year. And again, I think the more traditional ideas of carnival are the beaded outfits, which are incredible. But I kind of like these quieter moments. So every year there's a king and queen of carnival. There's an adult king and queen, and there's a child king and queen. So this was 2019's junior king and queen of St. John's Carnival. And I just love this shot. I feel like it was kind of like a serendipitous moment. I feel like there are a lot of elements that work well together. You've kind of got the triangular shapes that are in the umbrella that match with the triangular shapes of the banner, but one is in black and white and one is in color. And then the blue and yellow from their outfits and the car play together really well. So in terms of shape and color, I just feel like this is an exciting piece. And then even expression. I love how baby girl has her hand like cupped and cupped in the proper queen salute. So this was a special moment. And then this image, I've had so much I wouldn't say mixed feedback because I haven't shown it to that many people, but there's folks that I've shown this image to and they just feel nothing. And they're like, the hands and arms are amputated. And why are you showing this? But there's something about this that just feels so reminiscent of like Black girlhood, like these dance costumes that we've probably all worn at one time or another, the little ballet flats, the clearly fake ballet bun that's like a little too big for her head. The glitter that's kind of gently like on her shoulders, and even the way the glitter reflects in that little bit of motion blur on her arm. Um, I don't know, there's just something about this that is really like tender for me. And I also really love the color story. And there's just something about the quiet that I really enjoy. So this is one of my favorite photos from that set. Okay, so after I left the Virgin Islands, I probably went back to Los Angeles for a little bit, and then I ended up in West Africa. So a friend of mine invited me to go to a wedding in Portugal as a guest. I said, sure, why not? I was really into street photography at the time, and I didn't find Porto to be particularly compelling in terms of photography. I'm in Portugal and I'm trying to figure out, what's the easiest way for me to get to the continent. So I see that there are a bunch of regular flights from Portugal to Cape Verde. And I learned that's because Cape Verde used to be a Portuguese colony, and there's a huge Cape Verdean population in Portugal, which I actually did know. But, folks are constantly flying back and forth to see family. So I say, okay, cool. It's cheap. It's direct. It does, it's not a long flight. Let's do Cape Verde. So I knew it was an island. I knew it was on the water. But I erroneously assumed that it was one island. And I found out that it's actually an archipelago, which I believe in this case is 9 islands. So there were 2 airports that I could choose from. I chose one that landed on the island, or that was based on the island Sal in the city called Santa Maria. So I kind of booked it. The next day, hopped on a flight, went on a whim. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I knew there would be a beach involved because again, it was an island, but I wasn't sure about like the actual dynamics of the community at all. So I ended up staying at a hostel there. It was actually a hostel that was ran by turtle researchers because there's a lot of like biodiversity there. So there's a lot of animal research that happens there. And I leave my hostel and I go to the beach on the first day, and what I see is like a massive surf community. Um, I'm talking like as far as the eye can see, like people in the water with boards, young kids, like the kids you can see on either side, to teens and older folks as well, people running like surf clinics. And I remember being totally shocked at the time, um, because I had never seen African surfers before. Um, and then I also remember like immediately after that being a little ashamed of having that feeling, right? It's like this is a massive continent that's surrounded by water. Why would they not have a surf community? But it just got me thinking about like the representation of, I mean, I really think like Black people the world across, right? Like you don't really associate Black people with water sports. And in America, that's for like specific reasons. And similarly in other places that dealt with like, segregation. But to not have the vision or just basic like the basic understanding to know that surfers could exist any place, including in Africa, I think was a matter of thinking about the representations that even I internalized about Africa, somebody who's like really well educated and somewhat well traveled. And so that like big aha for me kind of made me in that moment commit to being thoughtful about the kind of representation of Black life that's being shown and being certain that I'm like contributing to diversity in those images so people know that Black folks exist in every corner, in every pocket, in every field, in every space. Um, so it was a really beautiful experience. At this point, I'm shooting with a digital camera, right? So I've kind of gotten like film down, but I'm still getting my bearings in terms of how to work with a digital camera. And I took so many photos. I spent many days like out on the beach, just watching folks surf. But I didn't include them here because I really didn't have like the technical know-how to capture it the way I really wanted to. Which is definitely frustrating looking back because I think it's a really interesting story. And then, after this trip, maybe 2 or 3 years after this trip, a book comes out called Afro Surf that some of you might have seen, that is largely composed of shots that were captured in Senegal and Cape Verde and Southern Africa as well. So this book coming out was confirmation that, oh, this is a really interesting story and, something that folks would really want to see. But at the time, I just didn't really have the know-how to capture it. But it was starting to get my wheels turning in terms of the type of work I want to do. Um, and these stills, these non-action shots, I think are indicative of exactly what was going on as well. So, okay, this is my one action shot. Um, okay, and the other community that I kind of fell in with Cape Verde was a group of Senegalese women who were migrant workers. So Senegal is directly across from Cape Verde, and because Cape Verde is an island, it's a popular tourist spot for European tourists. And so seasonally, these women come over from Senegal and sell their wares. You can see on the left, it's like essentially a market, and they sell the things you expect, fabric and jewelry and things like that. And I would kind of come back to this market day after day, and these women kind of really took a liking to me. Now, granted, I'm sure they wanted me to buy things, which I did. But there also was, I don't know, this like female community and comfort that I felt and maybe was attracted to as a solo female traveler. There was something about like being in conversation and knowing that I had kind of a safe space on that island, that brought me a lot of comfort. And we would spend a lot of time in dialogue, and these women would talk to me about what the experience is like having to be a migrant worker in that way. Senegal isn't that far away, but they do leave their children behind and leave them with other family members or with spouses, and talking about how that can be difficult for them to manage, but it's necessary in order for them to earn a living. So yeah, you see a wider market shot, you see some type portraits in which you can see some jewelry adornments that again, I think kind of tie back to some of the stuff we saw at the Regency West and some of the stuff we saw in the images that I captured at Carnival. And it's here I kind of like lean into actively kind of exploring details and I'm really leaning into these gold earrings here and also like the weave pattern of her braid. And again, thinking about all the ways those visual representations are in conversation with culture. This is another set of images from Cape Verde, and this is the only slide that I have that really shows any kind of architectural work. When I first started doing street stuff, I also was interested in urban decay and architecture, and I've since kind of let that fall by the wayside. I currently now assist a local architectural photographer, Kate Winchaleski, and um, architectural photography, real deal high level architectural work requires so much attention to detail and so much specialized skill and equipment. And I don't know if I am that detail oriented. So I've never leaned into architecture full time in terms of a money making genre of photography, but I've just included it here because from the outset, there was something that I really enjoyed about that light and line conversation. Okay, so that was 2019. I had decided that I really enjoyed photography and I was thinking about pursuing it full time. So I was planning to apply to graduate school, a new media photojournalism program at George Washington University. I'm still based in Los Angeles, but I'm looking towards GW. So I had been traveling all of 2019, and I had an opportunity to go to Ghana for New Year's 2020, Accra, Ghana. And it was a part of this campaign called the Year of the Return. And since there have been many years of the return, but the concept is Black Americans from across the diaspora come back to the continent to celebrate the new year. So I was a bit hesitant actually. Again, I'd been traveling all year and was a bit tired and, maybe a little financially strapped. But I decided to do it. And I went along with a friend of mine from college who's Nigerian American who since graduating has been living in Lagos full time. So we started in Ghana and then I went back to Lagos with her. And then I have another friend who lives in the Gambia. So I went to Banjul in Gambia and stayed with her. And then I ended that trip in Senegal. So I went through 4 countries in a month. And it was interesting. The moment I got back, I mean, the week after I got back from the trip, the news started saying there's a virus coming out of China and travel is canceled. So the timing was really perfect. Like, if I didn't go on this trip because I was so, tired or strapped or what have you, I wouldn't have been able to travel again for the next 2 years. So I'm glad that I did slide it in. And then also in terms of timing and when I came back just in time before they really shut off travel. So in the end, it felt really serendipitous. And a lot of this work went into my portfolio that I used to apply to grad school in that February. So these are images from Senegal. They look similar to Cape Verde in some way because again, they're just across the water from each other. So in terms of people and style, there's a lot of things that are going back and forth between them. So these first two images are from a beach called Yoff Beach. And I think this is where my portraiture starts to take a bit of a turn in the sense that it's not as poised, right? Like if you look back in some of those earlier pictures, there's a lot of like happy smiling faces. And I think I'm getting better about how I'm showing up in these spaces and being able to get like a true honest expression from folks and kind of not let the camera be so obtrusive. This one on the right here, this was taken on Goree Island. And some folks on this call might be familiar with Goree Island, but it's a really infamous slave port. And so this was an image of students who I assume were on some kind of field trip to visit the location of the port. And this young girl is looking down the corridor that leads to the actual port where folks were put on the ship. And I just think there's something really like haunting about her expression that's really indicative of like the kind of energy that's in that space. So that's one of my favorite photos from that trip. Um, that's good. More from Senegal. This is also a moment where my work starts to expand a little bit. Again, like I'm into portraiture, so I'm always ready to be tight and like pull up right in somebody's face. But this is when I'm starting to understand that there's like a lot of context that can be offered from the larger, wider environment. This is also in Senegal, and this is one of the moments where I feel like I put my creative director hat on. So this was the hotel that I stayed on the far right. This is the hotel that I stayed in Senegal, and I chose it because obviously aesthetically it's beautiful, full of like mosaic tiles. And then this individual here, my model for the day, his name is Kita, and I was in Senegal with a friend from LA. We just happened to be there at the same time, and we went to dinner, and Kita was our waiter. And I thought he just had such an interesting look. I asked him if he wanted to do a shoot with me the next day. Um, he didn't speak any English. He spoke French and Wolof. So there was a bit of a language barrier, but we were able to work it out. And these are some of the images that came out of that shoot. I really love this one on the far left. Like this is Kita, and then this is actually my friend from LA who styled herself. And I just think there's something about the leading lines that really draw you into the image. And there's so much color and pattern and texture play, but it really all works together. More from Senegal. So this was in Nigeria. Lagos sits on water, and I believe Lagos is actually lake in Portuguese, and it sits on a lagoon. So there's a region in Lagos called Makoko, and Makoko is an informal settlement that sits on stilts. So people have to boat wherever they're going. They boat to school, to the market, from house to house. And the people are actually Eglon people who are who are from the area that's now known as Benin. So they actually speak French. So you'll see here, this is the schoolhouse where the kids are learning French. This is me on one of the boats heading down a waterway. And these are some of the children who row and operate their own boats. There was a really large degree of like child autonomy in that space that I was kind of surprised about. And you can kind of see the living conditions here. And these children, I'll zoom in on it. These children are actually nailing a wooden plank onto, I assume, what's their home with a shoe, you know? So these are the kind of conditions that the children are in. But they also have a degree of autonomy that seems like it lends itself to them having like a community of their own, right? It seems like there is a lot of responsibility, but it also seems like they are really active members of their society. So this is another shot at the schoolhouse, which I really love. I love the color play and the lines here. And then this is another view of the waterway. And this is a space that is actually marketed as the Venice of Africa, right? Like tourism groups try to parlay it as like a similar kind of tourist experience because obviously there are similarities in terms of the ways that people live on waterways. But the reality is very different for both of those groups of people. Venice is really a protected area that the Italian government really spends a lot of time making sure is supported and has the infrastructure required to keep up these pristine old buildings. And Makoko, on the other hand, is in tension with the Nigerian government, who actually views the settlement as an eyesore and has actually been trying to demolish the village for some time. So I come back from all my travels. This is still 2020, right? I'm grounded. The pandemic is happening. And simultaneously, there's the murder of George Floyd. So there's a lot of activation in California and everywhere else in the country. I have some serious protest work, but I chose for this Los Angeles section to show some more jubilation. So these two images on the left, they're both from Juneteenth and they're in Leimert Park, which is the same area where the Regency West is located, that booming Black business district. And again, you know, the focus here is adornment, style, fashion. And then on the right here, this is an image of a Compton cowboy. So this was from a Compton rally during that time. And a lot of you have probably seen images of Compton cowboys. They've become famous in the last few years. And they're a group of Black men who live in Compton, who raise and ride horses. So this is one of the snaps from the Compton Cowboys rally. It was led by the mayor of Compton, a few celebrities. I think it was Russell Westbrook, who's from LA. He was also a big part of this activation. So this was an interesting moment for me because I had covered a lot of protests in LA at the time, and your instinct is to get the action, is to focus on who's the speaker. And this is one of the first times where after I got this shot, I said, you know what, there's like kind of too much going on, and I have so much of this. I have so much signage. Let me go see if there's like some more quiet moments happening on the periphery. So I decided to walk out a side entrance. I came in a different entrance. And when I walked out, I happened to see Kendrick Lamar walking down the steps as well. And he's with security. He's in all black. He hasn't spoken. He's definitely trying to be, incognito. But he sees me seeing him. And it's funny because in my mind, I remember him smiling, but he's got this mask on, so he didn't. But there was kind of like a kindness in his eyes. And he saw and I just raised my camera and he nods and he stops and he poses for me. Um, so obviously I think, it's a incredible like American figure in terms of artistry across the board, not even just in hip hop, but also I think a really beautiful searing portrait and says a lot with just his eyes. So a photo that was very similar to this went viral after the protest. But it wasn't me, it was another shooter who had a digital camera. And this was one of those moments where the real tension of film versus digital came into play because I had to wait to get my film developed, whereas this guy could just, upload his photo the next day and, has like 100,000 impressions. So that was frustrating. In some ways, feels like a missed opportunity. And now I don't shoot in film very much anymore, especially because my clients just need a faster turnaround. But on the back end, a friend of mine at the time worked for Interscope, which is the label that Kendrick Lamar was signed to at the time. So I showed her the photo and she showed it to her friend who was the agent. He was like, "Oh my God, I'd love a print. Can you make one?" I said, "Sure." This is like the first time I'm making like a fancy print. I go to a fancy art store in Los Angeles and buy like the highest grade paper. And when I deliver it, I wrap it in this Japanese wrapping paper. I'm like super excited. And maybe a week after the initial request was made, the guy comes back to me and he says, "Hey, can you print one for my friend?" And I say, "Sure, no problem, same price." So I deliver the two to him. Later on, I go tell another friend of mine the story and what happened. And he said, "Well, did you ask who the friend was?" I said, "No, I didn't ask who the friend was." And he was like, "Well, do you think the friend could be Kendrick?" And at the time, it never crossed my mind that it could be him. But now, ever since, that is like the story that I like to hold to my chest. So I like to think that Kendrick Lamar owns this print in his home, in his collection, if not up on his wall, which is better than going viral at the end of the day. So I ended up getting accepted to grad school and moved back to DC in the fall of 2020 to go to the Corcoran School of Art and Design. So I did a lot of protest photography. Sorry, quickly, Lewis, I just want to check in. How am I doing on time? Do I have to be wrapped by one?
No, you're totally fine. We'll let it go. We'll let it go
Okay.
as long as you want to keep talking because we're loving this.
Okay. All right. Um, so this was yeah, this is Washington, DC. It's still 2020. Protests are happening. I'm in school, so my style has to shift. Again, I can't be shooting film anymore because I've got to turn in photos to my professors the next day. So I do a lot of BLM stuff. This was the night that the verdict came out in which the officers were not charged in the killing of Breonna Taylor. So there was a huge activation. You can see her image, and then there's the White House in the back there. I'm also doing a lot more protest work. So I'm trying to think about, okay, like what are quiet, like detail moments that you can capture, again, that are outside of like the common signage because it can get repetitive really quickly. And so I did plenty of BLM protests, but the more interesting experiences for me were covering MAGA rallies. So I did two. I did three in total, but I did two that were a little um, tumultuous, I guess, in a way. So this is one of the Stop the Steal rallies, and I was very intentional about how I showed up to it, right? Like I am very obviously Black, I'm a woman. So I made the intentional decision to show up in an outfit that I called MAGA Light, which is like I wore a salmon colored hat from like the Utah National Park, and then I wore like my bluest blue Levi jeans and I think maybe like a white t-shirt or maybe a cream jacket, like something similar to this, because I was already going to stick out and I didn't want to stick out more. And I was very intentional about not wearing black because I knew there would be counter protesters there who would be dressed in black. So I went and I was anticipating kind of being rebuffed, if not because I had a camera because of my identity. And honestly, my experience was the total opposite. Um, a lot of the BLM activists that I had been working with at that point were very like frustrated and skittish with photographers because they were fearing being captured and having to deal with some kind of like state retribution, right? Being fined for being out after curfew or being pinned with some kind of charge of destruction of property, whether or not that was actually anything they were involved in. So I would go there and they would actually like hold up umbrellas to block our cameras. And there was a lot of conversation that was going on in the PJ space about the tension of, okay, it's our job to document and like bring awareness to these issues, but how do we do it in a way that doesn't bring harm to the folks who are like out on the front lines? So I was anticipating dealing with some of that resistance too, but the MAGA folks absolutely loved the camera. They saw my camera and were ready to smile and were ready to pose. Like they were very interested in the vanity of it all. Um, and then it was also interesting to see how they kind of were in relation to actual Black Trump supporters who were in the space. And I don't know who these all the figures were, right? So it's possible that some of those Black folk who were there were prominent figures in like the social media space, but a lot of these white supporters were walking up to them and wanted to take pictures and kind of be in their proximity. There was a rap concert that happened. It wasn't a famous artist. It was just some guy who had a song in his heart about Trump. I think it was one Black guy and one white guy, and they went crazy for the rap performance. And to me, it was just kind of odd to witness the ways that these people whose party or a specific subset of their party has a lot of racist claims and positions, but also watch these people in real time really be attracted to the Black figures that are in their space and Black culture at the same time. So it's something that kind of like seemed in conflict to me. But maybe if I think a little more deeply about it, it's not, right? There is a degree of like, um, I won't say obsession, but like this deep interest that they have despite their best resistance or their professed resistance. So that was a really interesting experience for me as a photojournalist in which I entered a space with one preconceived notion and actually walked out with a different one. So this image was striking to me. This was a young Black girl who was with her white mother, auntie, caregiver. And I just thought about what her experience is in the home. And I also think, compositionally, I like the way the light's hitting her fro. And I think, don't want to read too much into it, but I think there's something interesting about this young Black woman having a monkey mask covering her face at a Trump rally. So this is more Trump supporters. And so initially I was in the fray, right? Because I wanted to be up close and personal. And then when things started to kick off, because there were counter protesters, I pulled myself out because I wanted to be able to shoot in to get their reaction. So this is these folks railing against the folks that they would call Antifa. Maybe there were some Antifa members there, but I think largely it was BLM members. You can see a lot of crowd members taunting folks from across the way. This is the police support, making sure things don't get out of hand. A lot of jeering, a lot of daring folks to come over to their side. This was a young man who was arrested at counter protester. And then this is another image that I really enjoy from all of my protest coverage. I think there's just something quiet and soft about that. So that was my first year of grad school. And my second year, I had to complete a thesis project. And so I had been working with a lot of protest organizers who at the end of 2020 had really gotten what they call protest fatigue. They had been organizing for a long time and they kind of felt like, okay, like what have we achieved really? So a lot of them moved into mutual aid spaces that looked like offering food support to communities in need. And so kind of being connected in those spaces, I got interested in the agricultural space in Washington, D.C., and kind of took a deeper dive into agriculture as an industry altogether. And just was really fascinated about the space in terms of the very real like repercussions and consequences that our current farming industry has on health and wellness in terms of diet, but also environment. And then also the conversation about like Black economic wealth that is deeply tied to farming. Obviously, at one point in American history, Black folk were the leaders in agricultural sciences. Post-emancipation, those folk became very, very successful, and there was a concerted effort to squash their success, both by local white farmers who are now in competition with them, and their means of quelling the Black success was often through mob violence. And then the USDA, the American government, intentionally denied loans to Black farmers who couldn't survive without those funds. So there's been a push in recent years for people to kind of get back into those spaces. One, to have food sovereignty, but also to get back to the land and kind of be in communion with nature around you. So I did a portrait series about 10 different women in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area who were farming largely on smaller plots of land. Check the chat. Thanks, Carlene. Thanks for jumping in. This is Michelle. This is Erica. So she is actually a cancer survivor. She is someone who had a full-time job, um, was diagnosed with cancer, is now in remission, and has since decided to farm full-time on a plot of land where Harriet Tubman used to live. This is Gail and Joyce. Joyce runs a small farm that also serves as like an agritourism business, because part of what the thesis project was about is like, how do these women make these models financially sustainable for them? Because farming is very difficult to be successful in. So Joyce's story is kind of about how she brings in like the Airbnb portion to also keep her actual grow running. Gail was the person who had the largest plot out of all of these women. She had 50 acres in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. And she was someone who had received a loan from the USDA. And her story was really interesting. I also did a written piece about her. During the stimulus packages that were given out during the Biden administration, there was one piece of legislation that offered 120% loan forgiveness and reimbursement to certain farmers of color, right, who had been historically disenfranchised within the field. So Gail was a person who was slated to receive that funding. And it was during COVID. There were obviously constraints in terms of supply chain. And she proceeded to lay out her business plan for the year with the idea that this money was coming in and she'd no longer have to pay back the loan. Well, months after that was issued, white farmers sued the program and said it was discriminatory against them, and her funding was stalled. So Gail's story kind of looks like, okay, well, how do I pick up the pieces based on what I was promised from the U.S. government, and how they broke a promise again to Black farmers. This is Anne. This is another farmer on her family's land in her grandfather's truck in Virginia. This is Jami. She's from California. She moved out here to homestead with a partner of hers looking for a farm to buy. Her and that partner actually broke up, and her piece of the story is looking at how it's been really difficult for her as a single woman to be able to buy land, even though she has the financial restrictions. There are people who are interested in selling land to her and her husband who are no longer interested in selling it to her as a single woman, and kind of the challenges that women face in a male-dominated field. And this is Miriam. She is an urban farmer who works alongside Michelle, the first woman you saw at a local incubator farm in Watkins Park, Maryland. So I have graduated successfully. My thesis is done. And now I am freelancing. And I am doing a smattering of PJ work. I'm doing a lot of corporate stuff. But in the summer of 2023, in August, I am offered my first big assignment for the New York Times. While I was in school, I did a program called Eddie Adams, which is a workshop for photojournalists. And in that program, I was selected for an assignment award with People Magazine. So I connected with an editor from People Magazine. That was in 2022. In 2023, this editor had moved to the New York Times and remembered my thesis work about farmers. So the first story that she was assigning for was about indigo growers and farmers and artisans in South Carolina. And she said, I remember this was your story. This story looks a lot at Gullah Geechee people and cultural Black heritage in South Carolina and agriculture. I think you'd be perfect for it. So she sent me down to South Carolina, and I wrote alongside the author, I wrote alongside the writer of the story, Patty Brown, for a week from Charleston, South Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. And we were reporting on two stories simultaneously because it turned out the writer had a second story that she was interested in completing in the same region. And she said two birds, one stone. So when I got there, I told her this was my first assignment for the New York Times. And she said, oh, wow, they really threw you into the deep end. She said, in my 40 years of reporting, I've never done two stories simultaneously. So welcome. Um, and it was arduous. It was really long days in like swamp heat in South Carolina, lots of driving. But it was incredibly rewarding. And we got to meet and speak with and kind of catch a window into the lives of people who are doing beautiful work down in South Carolina. So both of the stories were shot summer 2023. Then October 7th happened not too long after that. And I think it kind of threw off the editorial timeline. So my pieces just like disappeared. They didn't happen. And I said, you know what? It's all good. Like, I just appreciate the opportunity. Y'all paid me, call me for the next one. Maybe these are never going to see the light of day. So someone texts me on Thanksgiving Day and they say, Happy Thanksgiving, congratulations on your timepiece. And I say to them, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it turns out that the Praise House story, which was the secondary one, ended up getting published on Thanksgiving Day and ran as the Sunday cover for the arts and leisure section for Thanksgiving weekend. And then the Indigo story actually didn't run until an entire year later. So that was definitely like a lesson in patience, but once again was a cover for the section, which is a big win. So the patience paid off. So I'll run through these quickly. This is Lee McGar. She's a indigo artist in Charleston, South Carolina. This is her studio. Studio. More details from the studio. So Lee, she grows indigo crop, but she also buys indigo crop to use for her dyeing practice. And the individual she buys it from is a monk named Father John. Father John is an Orthodox monk who lives in seclusion as a part of his religious practice. So we weren't sure if we were going to be able to speak with him, but he ended up being willing to take us in and show us a little bit about how he grows things and how he does his own indigo dye. And I'm really glad he did because this is one of my favorite portraits that I've ever taken. This is just him in his front hallway. Indigo plant. This is Erin King Comer. She's a really well-known Black indigo artist. She's a textile artist. She works with multiple different techniques. She does some Japanese shibori, but she's also really well known for doing a method called batiking, which is what you can see here on her dress. I keep pointing, y'all can't see that, which you can see here on her dress. So the way that works is batik, you carve a stamp, right, to make the design, and you drop it in hot wax, and then you print the hot wax on the textile, and that's what creates the work. She lives in an indigo trailer on St. John's Island. This is where she creates all her work. This is Sarah Green. Sarah Green is a Gullah Geechee woman whose family has lived on this land for generations. And she is kind of a community matriarch, and she runs a teaching farm where she teaches children and other folks how to grow indigo at her farm. That's the property. That's her at work. And then this is just a portrait that I really love. This gentleman's name is Jeremiah. He's a president of a Black farming association in South Carolina that's really trying to partner indigo growers with possible clients and kind of getting kind of generating support for the return of that specific crop. And I just think there's something about this that is so indicative of South Carolina with all this Spanish moss falling around him. And then finally, this is the second piece, which is about praise houses. And praise houses were houses of worship that used to be on plantation land that now folks are either renovating and worshiping in actively or restoring. So this is Moving Star Praise House. This is also in South Carolina, and this is them during service led by this woman named Pastor Kay Collington. This is a portrait of her outside of the Praise House. And this is one of the first moments where I started using strobe lights in my photography, because a lot of it had been natural light, which is largely what happens in PJ spaces and in documentary spaces. But here I had a little fill light kind of come in to kind of mimic the sunlight kissing her face. And I think this one was really successful. And the piece ran, online. It ran in the newspaper. It actually ran in like a Japanese edition of the New York Times. And this was the lead photo every time. So this was, I think, one of the most successful ones. This is the Praise House. Little details from inside the Praise House, and you can see like a service that happened in 1963. This woman's name is Charmaine Minifield, and she was kind of our host as we drove through all the different cities in South Carolina. So again, we went from Charleston to St. John's to Wadmalaw Island to St. Helena to Darien, Georgia to Jacksonville. And she kind of took us through the spaces. And she is an artist who kind of reimagines praise houses and keeps those traditions alive in new artistic interpretations. So she's actually built a praise house in Atlanta, Georgia, where she lives, and that is her art installation. This is Reverend Griffin Lotson. He runs a church in Darien, Georgia, and we are outside of a praise house that he actually used to worship in when he was much younger, but now has obviously fallen into disrepair. A lot of that congregation that he grew up with now worships in his church, which is called Sam's Memorial Church, and these are some shots from the service. These women are getting ready to prepare or to perform a ring shout, and a ring shout is a traditional kind of calling in of the ancestors that uses specific percussion and traditional hymns, and they usually do it dressed in batik clothing like that. And then finally, this is Reverend Renty Kitty Jr. and Brenda Kitty Moses. They're in Bluffton, South Carolina, and they're standing next to a praise house that has been next to their home since they were born. This praise house was actually moved from a plantation. I think it's called the Belfair Plantation, and was moved next to their family home. And so they grew up worshiping there and are now in charge of preserving it. An interior. This is Mrs. Kitty showing us how she would like process during service. This is just a little detail shot of some drums that have been left behind. I really like the way the light plays off that. And then finally, this is a detail shot of a window element. And yeah, that's all the work I have to share with you today. Thanks for sticking with me, folks. I welcome to take any questions if there, any quick ones. I know folks might have to jump off, but I'm here to chat.
Yeah, awesome, awesome presentation. I've known you for a few years at this point, and there are so many details of your story and the details of your work itself that I just didn't know. This was really, really great presentation. Um, I can kick off the questions here. I do have one from the very beginning. You said that you got your first camera from a gift from your mother in undergrad, right? Which is funny because that's how I got my first camera too. Was like early graduation gift from my mother. My mother was also surprised that I asked for this, but like, did you know you were a creative and artist before that, or were you like, what kind of sparked that quest right there, that journey right there?
That's a good question. I think the title artist feels like tricky and heavy, and I still don't know if I even really identify as that. And maybe that's just, my own imposter syndrome coming into play. I think creativity is really about like a thought pattern and process and about taking whatever elements that are in front of you and kind of recomposing them in an interesting way. And so I think that is something I've always been able to do. Again, I was in fashion initially. And I think that that's what drew me to fashion, right? How can I put together these pieces in an interesting way? I'm also really interested in interiors. I'm also really interested in like craftsmanship. So I think I had an eye for beauty in a way, but I don't know if I would have called myself an artist up until that point. And even after completing art school, I still don't know if I am ready to take on that title.
It's definitely a weighty title for sure. But you consider yourself a strong storyteller, right? Like at this point for sure. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Um, I have more questions, but are there any questions from the audience? Yes, Cortland.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing today. And like I said in the chat, I saw the image with the moss, and I'm from Charleston, and I
Oh, wow.
saw it, and I was like, this feels like Charleston, and so that's why I signed up for the event. Because I was like, I wonder if she'll talk anything about that, or if my inklings are right. And they were, and so I hadn't heard about either of these pieces. Very familiar with indigo, very familiar with batik, very familiar with like cultural religious practices from the area. So I'm very excited. And I pulled up both of the pieces on my computer screen. So I will go read them after this. So very excited. But my question for you is, I know you do a lot of photojournalism, a lot of documentary work, right? How do you approach in your head? Are you there? Or how do you build your shot list? I guess because a lot of it is observatory, or even if you're going into like shooting for a piece like the Times, how are you thinking about building a story? Are are you thinking, oh, this is what I would like to get, or, how do you build that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for being so complimentary. And I'm glad my images rang true to you about, what South Carolina really looks like authentically. So that's exciting to hear. Um, a shot list is hard. And, again, I am a portrait photographer. That is what I am drawn to, like people. And there's like some landscapes, but like I'm dialed on the people. And so on my first assignments, I really got the feedback of like, hey, you have to dial out because you have to tell a full story. Um, so, one adage that people say in PJ is wide, medium, tight, right? You got to get your overall, and then you get your medium shots, and then you get your details. And so I always try to keep that in mind because again, it's important that people are able to feel immersed into the space. And if you're just dialed on one individual, that doesn't necessarily always translate. So I'm always getting scene setting details and portraits. And then you just also have to be really adaptable, right? Like sometimes there may be a scene that's like really interesting, but has like zero available light. So it's like you make a decision in the moment. It's like, okay, I can bump my ISO insane and it'll kind of be grainy. And sometimes people know that's just the reality in photojournalism. Or sometimes you can just, once you've kind of got that establishing shot, those key shots, you can just follow the light and kind of if you have the time to step back and wait for action to move through that light, you can often really get some special moments. So it's a dance of, yes, following the action, but also like following where the light's moving, where you might get a really uh, pristine and beautiful shot. Does that answer your question? Okay, perfect. Kurt, hello.
Great presentation, great work.
Yeah.
What's an assignment, I guess, you know, as you're in your practice today, what's like one of your dream assignments or, stories to help tell?
Yes. So some of my dreams are to go back to the stories that I initially found in Cape Verde and in Makoko and do them well. I would love to, and I'm even in conversation with some folks based in Nigeria who run an arts organization who potentially have some inroads in Makoko to go back there later this summer to kind of expand on that work and do it in a way that is really anchored in storytelling and is less voyeuristic. Because from that point, I really was exterior. I was on a tour and that was all that I could do. But I would love to actually be able to like really zoom in and tell the stories of the folks that live there. And similarly to the surf story, Afro surf exists, so maybe I miss breaking that story, but I would still love to go back and again, similarly, like zoom in on one of those folks who is actually a part of the surf community and tell a more nuanced and thoughtful story. Another story that really excites me as of late is about a Nigerian artist called Bruce Onopego. He's 92. I learned about him through an exhibit and kind of a retrospective that they did at the African Art Museum. And he is someone who is designated as a living UNESCO heritage site, which only like 50 people in the world are, but like that's how prolific he is. And every year he runs an artist workshop called the Harmattan Workshop. It's twice a year. It's in Abuja, Nigeria. And artists from all over the continent come and share about their different practices and learn from Bruce. So again, this same Nigerian arts organization that I've been in conversations with about Makoko works very closely with who they call Baba Bruce. And so there's a workshop that's happening in August. And so that's a story that I'm really excited to tell and think I might have some actual inroads to be able to get the access required. So always interested in arts and culture. Those are the pieces that really excite me. You're welcome.
I got another question. Because I remember years ago we had a conversation and you said something about film where you were like, I feel like to make it in photography, with film you had to brand yourself as like a film photographer hardcore. And then heard your story about Kendrick Lamar and then the other photo went viral. Like that would make me look at film sideways as well. But I wanted to ask, like, what is your relationship with shooting on film now?
That's a good
I loved
question.
your work. I loved your work early in back in the day too. So.
Thank you, thank you. And there was in that early era, there was like so much play and like freedom, and I was kind of just like doing whatever felt good in my gut. And then I went to school, and then like school gives you like rigor and structure and like what is technically correct. And I feel like there was a time where there was a tension in me where it's like I struggled to find that play while also being able to like execute at a high level, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I get a lot of that feedback from people where they're like, I love your early stuff. And I kind of want to get back into a space where I'm just like going for it again. And yes, maybe it is something about the film camera that allows you to just be a little lighter. At the time, the one I had was like a little Pentax. So it was easy to just like kind of carry and fit into any space, and it didn't feel like so cumbersome. So in some ways, my practice in terms of how I moved was just like a little lighter, and now I feel heavy with these huge, beautiful, expensive lenses that are really, really good, but kind of like slow me down and push me into like a space of like formality that I'm trying to break out of. So I'm glad you identified that, and something I've identified for myself and I'm trying to work through. But I recently have bought, oh, I'm gonna show you. I'll show y'all. I just bought a film camera. Give me 1 second. I was in a I was in London, and there's a photo market that happens there every Saturday. So I know I see everybody cheering. Thanks, guys. I just bought a Mamiya.
Yes.
I have recently taken this out to play for the first time, like a week or so ago. I haven't even gotten it developed. But I'm a member of the Creative Hand Studio, which is at 52 O Street, ran by Jared Hendricks, which a lot of folks know about. So Kurth Bob, actually, who we just saw, he was actually a member there and stepped away. And he actually offered me his spot at the studio, which I took with the intention of doing more studio work. So I shot at 52 O Street, and there's a role in here that's waiting to be developed and see the light of day. So to answer your question, I'm actively trying to get back into it. If for no other reason than like this was really expensive, so we gonna use it and make it shake,
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I'm excited to see what you do with that bat. Which one is that again? That's the
645.
ooh, good one. Good choice. Good
Yeah.
choice. Okay. All right, y'all. Any other questions? I think we might be able to do one more. Hey, Sam.
Hey, well, first off, thank you, Candace. I love how you're so able to articulate like what your thought process is, that I feel that's where so many of us struggle with. But my question is like, I noticed there's this recurring theme of like graphical elements and shapes and lines and that sort of compositional techniques in your images. And even like I'm looking at the portrait of Pastor K right now, and even the cracks in the ceiling of the porch like draw your eye to her head. And I was just wondering if those are elements that you're looking for as you're, immersing yourself in the space, or whether it's something that is sort of innate and natural rather than, an intentional thought process.
I think it is the latter. I think it is something that I'm drawn to. Like even thinking back to those photos from Cape Verde, like the only two architectural photos that I showed you, all of those are uh, scenes that are kind of in states of disrepair. And there's something about that like less than pristineness that I think lends a lot of character to a photo. So yeah, I can't say, I mean, I'm thinking about line, of course. Like I'm thinking about how people are framed. I'm thinking about how she's framed in that porch. But I can't say that I'm intentionally thinking about that crack, but I'm glad you caught it and saw it. And in my next talk, I'll be sure to point it out. But yeah, I think it is an innate thing. Like those graphic elements are something that I'm just kind of naturally drawn to. Thank you for your question.
Thank you for your answer.
All right. Anyone else? Okay, cool, cool, cool. Well, thank you all for hanging out with us here. Candace, do you have any other announcements or anything like that? Like,
All right. This is like, I know you got to reveal. Yeah, I was gonna do it at the end of my talk, and now it feels just kind of self-aggrandizing. But so I have been freelancing in the PJ space for a while. And outside of that, I do a lot of corporate work, and which is an avenue that has been opened to me by the graciousness of Lewis Tinsley and Kurth Bob. They've really done a really generous job of connecting me with the corporate space here in DC, which is how a lot of people make money. So I've done a lot of that work for the past 2 years, and I feel like I'm interested in moving a little more intentionally back towards the photojournalism space. So as of yesterday, I've accepted a position with the Chicago Sun-Times, and I'll be working full-time for that paper come July. So thank you so much, friends. Thank
Congrats.
you. So yeah, keep up with me. If you'd like, keep an eye out. There's a lot more work coming soon.
Yes, congrats again. That's awesome. Super pumped to see the work you do out in Chicago. Once again, I love Chicago, so great city to work at. But wonderful presentation. Thanks to everyone who came out. Yeah, follow Candace. She does dope stuff, so can't say it again.
Thank you, and thank you so much for hanging out, y'all. I know I'm a chatty gal, but sticking with me all the way through, and even through that interruption. I really appreciate you spending a little bit of your day with me. Thanks so much.